Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Ranjit, and thank you everyone for having me here today. So I'm going to go on from what Ranjit and Richard were talking about and elaborate from more of a personal angle. So our family has been through the cancer experience. Our son, Ned, was diagnosed with cancer just after his 2nd birthday. He was diagnosed with what is known as a common childhood cancer, acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and it was a shock. I'm a doctor, and we had a healthy older child, and we had no history of illness in the family. And it was a very steep learning curve. And just as Ranjit and Richard were talking about, it was a very scary time because it's not like a new diagnosis of other diseases. Cancer, there are a lot of preconceptions, so much stigma in the media. People with cancer always are portrayed looking very sick, and we always hear about when it goes badly. So it's very scary. And as Ranjit mentioned, it's very disempowering when you are suddenly thrust into a world when you're at the mercy of a medical team. It's an extra layer of complexity when it's your child who you're supposed to protect because you're their parent, and more so when it's a 2-year-old like our son who couldn't yet talk or understand as well. So there are a few things. We had a very complex 5 years with cancer. So I'll just flick to the next slide. And there are some things that I want to talk about that things that meant a lot to us that we discovered in retrospect, what we wish we had known before diagnosis. So this was our son on the left when he was diagnosed at the start of his first hospital admission when he was 2. And this picture on the right is just 6 weeks later. There's a drastic change in appearance. We know that from what the media says and what we read in books and see on movies. But it's a lot harder to process when it's your own life and your own child. And so, as I said before, it's a very scary road to walk. I'll just get to the next slide, please. So there are a few things that my husband and I have learned and are really important to convey because it's a good way of supporting others through this process that can be quite hidden. My husband is non-medical, so it was an even steeper learning curve for him. I could understand a lot that the doctors were talking about, but he couldn't at the beginning. So firstly, the isolation is crippling sometimes. When you're thrust into the cancer world, not only may you be physically isolated because you spend so much time in hospital, but your lifestyle is very isolated from what those around you will understand. Many people will have children at school and be going to work. When you're dealing with cancer, whoever it is in the family, often someone has to take leave from work, and you have to have children home from school for infection purposes, or if it's your child will be in hospital. The emotional and physical exhaustion is absolutely terrible. You underestimate how much you need to have restful sleep when you're thrust into a world where so much power is taken away. You can't think logically, you can't plan ahead like you usually do, and perform everyday tasks like the most basic of things to look after your family. A lot of people will walk away. You think people will rally around, and there are many that do, but a lot will walk away because it's just too traumatic for them to watch and they can't cope with it. So you will lose friends or family members. But you need to make new support networks, and there are ways and means of doing this, and you find your inner circle who you can trust in. So we found people who would update everyone outside of the family for us and respond to their questions, because it's so exhausting having to give every update about our son to extended family and friends. Coordinate help. So my husband and I tag teamed the nights in hospital, but along the 5 years that we were dealing with cancer, we had 4 children, and we had to try and do the best to manage, but also we had to rely on others to pick up and drop off children. Some people cooked meals for us, stocked our freezer, cooked healthy snacks for us to take to hospital, sat with our child for an hour so we could get some fresh air, and we did rely on a lot of people. Things like a meal train, there's a meal train website to coordinate people cooking for you, and there are other websites that can do things like that. Support groups are wonderful. Richard and I and Christina work for Rare Cancers Australia, and we provide support groups for people who are going through cancer and carers. And that's a great outlet to be able to connect with others who are going through similar experiences when you're finding that, you know, people around you don't understand the fear and the challenges that you're facing. And professional support is so important as well. Finding someone like a GP or a psychologist, counsellors, social workers. We have social workers in tertiary hospitals here in Australia where they have the cancer centres, and they help coordinate extra help if that's needed. If there are financial difficulties, they can step in there as well. And pastoral care workers can also stand in that space. When you're going through cancer, you feel like you're at the mercy of so many groups, but it's important to remember that you do have elements of control. And it's important to be able to use those outlets, because you need to feel empowered in some ways. Otherwise, it does feel very overwhelming. So things like, you don't have to accept visitors. We found that it was really difficult being at the mercy of people who just wanted to come into hospital and see us, and we could say no, we realized later on. We needed to be really careful with how we communicated with our son and our other children. At the very start, one of the nurses very wisely told me not to say, sorry that the nurse is doing this to you, because it makes the nurse seem like the bad guy and it pits them against us. But we have to be a team. We have to say, I'm really sorry you're going through this, but this is what the nurse has to do right now, and I'll give you a cuddle during that. Also, it's important to how you communicate with others, because once you're vulnerable, and you might be communicating in a vulnerable way, but once you've communicated to the public, you become susceptible to a public commentary, so to speak. People give their unsolicited advice, and they might not fully understand your circumstances or your family's needs. And we found that we just had to block some comments and some messages sometimes, because we were following the best advice of our oncology team. There are so many gift ideas for those in hospital that we don't even think about. Things like making the bed comfortable with pillows and blankets for long stays, homemade meals, nutritious snacks, other comfort items. When we were going through transplant with our son, we needed toys that could be easily sterilized, cleaned and sterilized, because he was so immunosuppressed, and other activity books for other children who we were having to entertain constantly as well, because we were away from home for that time. We had to use a lot of distractions because it was just so difficult to process. So my son had a very complicated course, as I alluded to before. He had nearly 3 years of normal cancer treatment in Tasmania, which is the southern part of Australia, for the first nearly 3 years, but then his leukemia relapsed whilst he was on treatment. And so we had to fly the very next day interstate to the Children's Hospital in Melbourne. And I was 29 weeks pregnant with our 4th child. And it was very, very traumatic for a lot of us, especially our son. And he was admitted nearly full time during that first few months at the Children's Hospital, and we were having to rely on a Rotary Club to provide us with a 2-bedroom flat for our family. We had to quit work, and my 2-year-old daughter, our 2-year-old daughter, became the bone marrow donor for that first transplant for him. So there was so much to process, as well as me having another baby. There was a lot of processing. We didn't have our regular networks around us, and we needed distractions like books and music and podcasts to listen to. In that vein, we found it really helpful to take notepads to tape recorders to appointments, because even though I'm a doctor, there are so many things flying around your head that you often walk out of an appointment and you forget the question that you had or the blood test number that you really wanted to know. So we wrote down things during the week, or if we were inpatients, we wrote them down over the course of the day, and we'd ask them when the doctors arrived the next morning. Like Richard said, you have the right to say you don't understand and ask for more information. I'm a doctor, as I said, but my husband had no medical knowledge at the time, and it was a very steep learning curve. So he needed to take more time to ask questions at every appointment. And for the most part, the doctors were very understanding of this and would slow down and explain. I realized that is not always the case, though. One thing we needed to focus on is just creating a small amount of joy each day, because we were in transplant for months, and then we had to go to Seattle because he relapsed. We had to go to Seattle in America for 3 months for CAR-T. And then we had to return from Seattle and go straight back into another bone marrow transplant for another 6 months. And it was a lot of living in a hospital with 4 children, but separated because our other children couldn't go into the transplant unit. It was very difficult, and we often felt sad, but we had to find moments of joy for our children and for ourselves, things like listening to a 10-minute podcast that you look forward to every day, or having a hot cup of coffee with those few minutes of just stopping and looking outside, or going for a quick walk. Those small things make things a lot more sustainable. There's one big thing I want to talk about is reputable sources for information. That's important to me as a doctor. Credibility is defined as the quality or power of inspiring belief. So credible sources must be reliable sources that provide information that's objective and is true for everyone. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, there is a big difference between personal opinion, general internet sources, and scholarly journals. And this factored a lot into our experience, because our son started with a cancer that was commonly known, but then it took a different route and there was little information. And when we were in Seattle, his leukemia mutated, and we didn't know where to go because we were with the world experts and they still didn't know what to do. So we had to then look for the evidence, the credible sources. And it was a real learning curve, because we couldn't just rely on whatever we found on the internet. We had to work out. And of course, I've had training in that, but my husband hasn't. So I'll just go through a bit of that just quickly. We know that academic research papers generally use credible sources of information because they are reviewed by their peers, and their peers are often from places all over the world. And it relies on them providing the best, most accurate, recent information possible. So we as the patients searching, or the families, can rely on their expertise. But then using poor evidence detracts from their claims, and so it's less plausible, which means that these researchers are held accountable to a higher standard. And we know that if things are published in a journal, their claims are usually credible. We can trust them. These are the sources that are generally used by doctors and specialists in certain areas like oncology. So to determine whether something is credible, we need to be discerning and seek out further information, like if the author of a journal has an alternative agenda, if there's bias, if they use sensationalist language, if the information is up to date or fact-checked. And sometimes we found when we were struggling with cancer, our brains were too tired. We didn't want to do this extra work of working out where the credible sources were. We just wanted the organisations to do it for us. And we worked out that places like Rare Cancers Australia would be able to provide guidance to those credible sources, and government websites. We just had to make sure that we were talking to our doctors, because if they didn't have the time, then we'd ask them where we'd go for more information, and they'd direct us to the right places. Because if you go down Google, it can be a rabbit warren, as we all know. And lastly, just be kind to yourself through cancer. You know, there are a lot of expectations, but the person you've got to get through is yourself and your family members. And that's the only way you can do that, is by being kind. I'll just move to the next slide, just in this last minute. Our son, so that's our son. So after the second transplant, it showed that his transplant had worked, and we moved back to Tasmania, our home, after 18 months away. However, sadly, just 2 months later, it was found that his leukemia had come back a 4th time, and he was given a few months to live, and he sadly died at home just before his 7th birthday, and that was just 5 weeks after relapsing that 4th time. If we could just move to the next slide, please. So that was Ned, and these are our remaining children, our 13-year-old, 7-year-old, 4-year-old, and our new baby who's now 1. We've been very blessed to have them, and we have missed Ned a lot, but we've learned a lot through the experience. We've made new support networks. We've been able to direct other people and guide other people and counsel other people through this experience, and focus on things that bring us together as a family and bring joy to others. So I hope that's helpful for you today. That's just a little bit of our story. Obviously, there's a lot more that I didn't go into, but thank you for listening.
I think before we start, I would like to say that Emily, your story is really emotionally so laden that Wi-Fi and I are probably struggling a little bit to speak now, but we will change the wavelength now and move to something else. And Emily, thanks for sharing, Emily. That was very, very touching for us. Over to you, Wi-Fi.
Hi everyone. Well, I'm approaching this from the perspective, I'm approaching health literacy from the perspective of a writer and editor. It is totally different from what everybody has been saying. BCWA created a draft of this, where's the slide?
Can we have the first slide? Yeah.
Oh, whole question first.
Okay, so we have a poll question. Which book would you prefer to read to find out more about your disease? I think we have a picture. Sunil, can we have that? Yeah. So which book would you prefer to read to find out more about your disease? Is it the one on the left or the one on the right? So that's the poll question. So if you could answer that. And Sunil, do you want to move to the multilingual questionnaire? Yeah, this is the question for those who are reading a different language other than English. All right, can we move to the next, or do we wait for the results? So it's A or B? It's book A or book B? Are we waiting for results? Yes. So it is book B is 100. Oh dear. Book A is 0%.
100%. Let's hope for a message of hope.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that explains it. We go on to the next slide, right, Wi-Fi?
Yeah. Okay. Like I said before, I'm approaching health literacy from the perspective of a writer and editor. BCWA created a draft of this patient guidebook, which I edited. Ranjit and I worked together to produce a user-friendly publication for patients and caregivers. I hope this book will serve as a guide to patients as it helps unpack overwhelming information they get from their clinicians and also from well-meaning family and friends. It's like being in an infodemic, so much info. Who do I listen to? What is it, is right for me? Would be the questions in the patient's mind. It will help patients through their cancer experience in a one-step-at-a-time manner, as well as allaying their fears and anxieties. While editing the book and other literature, I understand that it's difficult for clinicians to communicate in a less technical way. So I hope this book can be an example to healthcare professionals on how to simplify communication with patients in a language that they can understand.
So this book was actually created with input from breast cancer survivors because it's for patients with breast cancer. And we definitely made sure that healthcare providers who are involved in the treatment or even diagnosis of breast cancer were involved to make sure that the information is validated. And patients like to know from other patients who have gone through the cancer experience. So it is important to have the input from all stakeholders. Just like in APPIS, we're talking about all stakeholders. It is certainly important to have all stakeholders into this, into the content. So it is available in our Facebook, the Breast Cancer Welfare Association Facebook, as well as a hard copy for those who want it. Because we are in transition state. We have people who want a soft copy online, but we also want people we also have people who say, I want to hold the book, turn the pages and see what's inside. And the title of the message, the title of the book is A Message of Hope, and it is actually addresses the patient's feelings of hopelessness into a positive mood, that there is always something that can be done to manage the situation emotionally as well as medically. Next slide, please.
Okay. We applied the KISS principle by keeping everything simple, comprehensible, and straight to the point. We had to keep in mind we were writing for lay people, someone like myself who doesn't know much about breast cancer, though I learned a lot throughout the process about the disease and how to communicate in a simple manner without complicating language.
So keeping it simple can enable individuals of all literacy levels, whether they've been to primary school or secondary school or to the university, to understand the content. Next slide.
Like all books, layout design were important as we wanted to attract attentions of patients and caregivers. We chose color tones that are warm, welcoming, and soft, pink being the dominant color. Besides it being the color associated with breast cancer, as in the pink ribbon, it also brings to mind being in the pink of health.
So the cover design in itself is something that patients want to open to read the content. Through my own experience of being diagnosed with breast cancer, the first thing that came to my mind was hopelessness. There is no hope. And the cover of the book, entitled A Message of Hope, with the word hope itself is in bold font. It's catching to the patient's eye, and the pastel pink background depicts the desire to return to the pink of health soon. The multicolored ribbon on the cover denotes the reality of ups and downs of our disease experience, which will impact us physically and emotionally and socially, with the highs and lows that a patient may experience as they go along the cancer pathway and treatment pathway. As newly diagnosed patients are unable to imagine or understand how certain things may look like you can see a picture on the left-hand side which shows a chemo pot inserted in an upper chest, because the dilemma that many patients have is, will it be a contraption sticking out of the skin? So just they cannot imagine what it looks like. So just an image can put the patient's mind to rest.
Yeah, we also asked ourselves who we were writing for. So we put ourselves in the reader's shoes. What do they want to know, and how best can we convey the information to them?
It's supposed to be the next slide. Yeah.
Okay. We put ourselves in the reader's shoes. We wanted to know, what do they want to know, and how best can we convey the information to them. We also realized they would want to be able to access info easily without having to plow through wordy paragraphs like you will find in a medical journal. We also wanted to show empathy with words used like the opening section of the book, You Have Breast Cancer. Both the paragraphs convey the message that we understand what you, the patient, is going through, and that your fears are real. This actually then set the tone for the book throughout. Even the title can reflect empathy, besides being catchy enough to attract attention, like Ranjit said earlier, to give patients hope when they are really, really hopeless.
So it's not just hope. Sorry. it's not just hope on the cover, it is a lot of information inside the book as well. So we actually identified and studied our audience. We talked to different patients and we tried to incorporate as much information to navigate the patient through the different sections of the book so that it is easy for everyone to read or even to refer to certain portions of the book. And we work closely with other patients and also healthcare providers like the clinicians to ensure that the information is factual. And we listed questions for patients to ask so that clinicians, when they meet up with the clinicians at a different point in time, they know what to ask. And most importantly, she can cope better emotionally, physically, and socially when she knows that there are ready-made questions for her at different points of her cancer experience. Next slide, please.
Yeah, language was important. We had to make sure that what was written must make sense to and be understood by all readers. We also had the book translated into Chinese and Malay to reach our target audience. An upbeat tone was used throughout the book, as not all is doom and gloom, and we wanted to be a beacon of light when a patient's world is crumbling in front of their eyes. We avoided writing in the third person as it gives a sense of detachment and what may seem cold to patients.
Yeah, and just to add to that, when we talk about the Asian communities, because Malaysia has a multilingual society, so we needed to make sure that we had all languages. At the moment, if you look at the Facebook, you will find two languages, English and the Malay language. But the Chinese language is just being designed right now. It has already been completed. The book is being designed and it will get onto the Facebook. So we not only reach out to the Malaysian audience, but we reach out to the Asia Pacific audience. Don't forget that even Australia has a multilingual country. So in the Asian Pacific region, you will find almost every country has people speaking different languages. So it's not, we are hardly getting any monolingual country. So we need to make sure that we have information in different languages for people. So I think we are very proud of the fact that we are doing this. Next slide, please.
Content. We wanted the words to speak directly to patients, like having a conversation. For example, in the tips for after diagnosis, on the point of a patient having trouble sleeping, we wrote, if you have trouble sleeping at night, ask your doctor for a sedative. That will give you a good night's sleep. By using words like these, make it more personal. We felt that it would put the reader at ease, who then will be encouraged to read on. We also put in quotes from several patients, sharing the experiences which can serve as an encouragement to other patients and that feel real to the reader. Having tips throughout the book for issues and concerns help patients as well. It is like giving them advice. It would feel like being given face to face. Then we explain all medical terms and jargon and provided a glossary, so it is not so daunting as a patient navigate through the book. We also made it user-friendly so that the reader can zoom into the section of interest to them.
What I see in this book is getting the patient empowered. Providing the patient with information that is useful empowers the patient to participate more actively in her treatment process. So this book can actually be very well followed up by patients who are going through even before diagnosis, right until the treatment is over. And beyond that, what happens after treatment is over? Many guidebooks end up with, now your treatment is over, okay, you're fine. But over here, what we have done is lifestyle after treatment as well. How can you live life to the fullest after treatment? So and this publication is fairly new, and so far we have received feedback from patients saying that the content of the book answers many questions and allays a lot of their fears that they've always had. And we also added quotes and sharing by other patients regarding their own experience or how they manage themselves. And it makes the patient feel that I'm not alone. And there's some validation there. It validates that others who have gone through the experience of breast cancer have also faced this problem. And so I'm not alone. If they've gone through it and they have survived, I can survive as well. And another thing that I would like to add is the development of this book was supported by the Association of British Women in Malaysia. So financially, you could also in your patient organization try and get a similar charity organization to contribute financially to your publication. So we need to acknowledge them as well. So if you do look at the book carefully, if you go to the Facebook, A Message of Hope, under Breast Cancer Welfare Session, you'll find that we have acknowledged the Association of British Women in Malaysia for having done this. So with that, I think this
Next
is the last
please.
slide.
No, there's another slide.
There's one more slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Before we get to that slide, I would just want to remind the audience that please do ask the speaker function if you have any questions, because we'll have Q&A afterwards. Yeah, next slide.
Yeah, that's the final slide. We will leave you with a list of things to keep in mind when creating literature.
Wi-Fi, we've lost you. So
hang on. Okay, I'm back. Something went wrong. Okay, we will leave you with a list of things to bear in mind when creating literature for the layperson. And on the screen, you can download A Message of Hope from the link provided on the screen. Thank you very much.
I think another thing that I would like to add here is that this book should be dynamic in the sense that it should keep staying, it should stay with time. It should always remain something that keeps changing with the time, because things do change with time. Treatments change. People have different types of side effects. There might be other issues that may need to be added on. So it should not remain a static book. So sometimes we remain static, it becomes out of, it's just not something that can be used anymore. So we need to make sure that we keep it updated from time to time. So that is sometimes the most difficult thing to do. To create something is easy, but then to modify it later on is something that you need a little more energy in yourself and say, yeah, we got to relook at this and see what can be done to change it. So thank you very much.
In the present.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you, Wi-Fi, for co-sharing.
Thank you, Ranjit.